The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over a quiet countryside home. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of fresh earth and the distant sound of crickets singing their evening song. Inside the cozy little house, George Thompson, 98 years old, sat by the window, his hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea. His eyes, still sharp and full of wisdom, gazed out at the fading light, as if watching time itself slowly pass by. "You know," he said with a gentle chuckle, "people always ask me the same question. George, what's your secret? How have you lived this long and still have the energy to enjoy life?" He leaned back, a knowing smile playing on his lips. "The truth is, longevity isn't about luck or some magic formula. It's about the little things, the small, quiet habits that we nurture day after day." George had spent nearly a century cultivating these habits, rituals so simple yet so powerful that they had shaped his life, his health, and his peace of mind. Every evening, without fail, he followed the same routine, a series of mindful practices that helped him sleep deeply, wake up refreshed, and embrace each new day with gratitude. He wasn't a doctor, nor did he have any special training in health or wellness. But what he did have was a lifetime of experience. He had seen friends and family come and go.
He had witnessed the world change in ways no one could have imagined. And through it all, he had remained strong, not just in body, but in spirit. "These habits," he said, tapping his temple, "are my way of telling my body and mind, we're
in this together. Let's take care of each other." Tonight, as he prepared for bed, he would once again honor the routine that had carried him through the years. A gentle walk under the twilight sky. A mindful approach to his last meal of the day. A deliberate choice to disconnect from the noise of modern technology. A warm soak to soothe his tired feet. And finally, a simple glass of warm water. A quiet reminder to nourish himself, even in the smallest of ways. "You don't have to do everything at once," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "Just start with one habit, one small step, and before you know it, you'll have built a life that feels lighter, healthier, and full of energy. Would you like to know the secrets behind these nightly rituals? Would you like to live a life of vitality, no matter your age? If you're ready to begin your journey to better health and longevity, stay with me as we walk through George's simple yet powerful bedtime routine. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel, because a healthier, happier life starts with small, intentional choices. The night unfolded slowly, wrapping the earth in a quiet stillness. The air was crisp yet gentle, carrying the scent of damp soil and the distant rustling of trees. George Thompson stepped outside, his hands tucked into the pockets of his worn-out cardigan, his footsteps soft against the gravel path. He had walked this path thousands of times, yet each night it felt new. The moon hung above, casting a silver glow on the world, and for a moment, George simply stood there, breathing it all in. People often asked him about the secret to his long life, expecting some grand revelation, some hidden wisdom passed down through generations. He always smiled at the question and answered the same way. "There is no secret," he would say, "just small things, done every day." And one of those things, a habit so simple yet so profound, was this: walking. A quiet stroll, just before bed, was a ritual he had kept for decades. He hadn't always been this way. When he was younger, life had been about movement, but not the slow, mindful kind. It had been about running to work, running after responsibilities, running toward a future he could barely keep up with. He had never thought much about slowing down until Margaret, his wife, had insisted on their nightly walks. She had been the one to show him that the world looked different in the evening, softer somehow, as if it too was preparing for rest. The beginning, he had resisted, always finding an excuse. Too tired, too cold, too much to do. But Margaret was persistent, taking his hand and leading him outside. "Just 10 minutes," she would say, "just enough time to say goodnight to the world." And so, begrudgingly, he had followed. What started as an obligation soon became something else entirely. He began to look forward to the cool night air, the way the stars flickered like old lanterns, the feeling of Margaret's fingers laced with his as they walked without hurry, without expectation. Even after she was gone, George continued their nightly ritual. The path was emptier now, but the habit remained, and with it, a quiet sense of presence. Walking had become more than just movement. It was a way to release the weight of the day. Each step felt like an unspoken conversation, a way to sort through thoughts without words, the things that had felt urgent, the worries that had clung to his mind, seemed to fade with every slow, deliberate stride. It was not just about clearing his mind, but also about caring for his body. He had watched too many of his friends age with stiffness, their limbs growing weaker, their energy fading. But George knew that the body, much like the mind, needed motion to stay alive. A gentle walk before bed kept his joints from growing stiff, his heart from growing tired. It was a simple habit, but in its simplicity, there was power. He often thought of how the world had changed. People no longer seemed to move just for the sake of moving. There was always a destination, a goal, an expectation. But nighttime walks were different. They asked for nothing but attention. They required no urgency, only the willingness to be present. The wind brushing against his skin, the distant chirping of crickets, the way his breath synced with his steps. It was all a reminder that life was meant to be lived at a pace that allowed one to feel it. As George made his way back to the house, he paused for a moment, looking up at the sky. The stars were bright tonight, scattered like pieces of time itself, stretching infinitely into the unknown. He smiled to himself, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart, the familiar sensation of peace settling into his bones. He had walked this path for years, and he would walk it again tomorrow, and the next day, and the next, until his steps were no longer needed. He knew now, more than ever, that longevity was not just about living long. It was about living well. It was about finding rituals that anchored the soul, about moving with intention, about allowing oneself to breathe deeply and fully. It was about slowing down in a world that refused to. And so, as he stepped back inside, the warmth of his home wrapping around him, he thought of the many people searching for answers, for the elusive secret to a long and healthy life. He wished he could tell them that the answers were never hidden. They were always there, in the smallest of things, a gentle walk, a quiet moment, the decision to pause and listen to the world as it whispered goodnight. If there was ever a lesson worth passing on, it was this. Take the walk. Let your feet guide you, not toward a destination, but toward a state of being. Walk not to get somewhere, but to remember where you are. And in those quiet steps, you just might find that the secret to a good life was never really a secret at all. The wooden spoon made a gentle sound as it clinked against the side of the bowl. George Thompson, 98 years old, lifted a small portion of soup to his lips, savoring the warmth as it spread through his body. The broth was simple, just a bit of chicken, some vegetables, a few herbs, but it was enough. It had always been enough. For decades, George had followed a quiet rule: never eat until you are full. He had learned it many years ago, not from a doctor, not from a nutritionist, but from an old friend he had met during his travels. He could still recall the day, sitting on a wooden floor in a small monastery in Japan, sharing a meal with a Buddhist monk. The monk's bowl was never filled to the top, and he ate with deliberate slowness, pausing after each bite. George, younger then, had eaten quickly, finishing his meal before he even realized it. Seeing his curiosity, the monk had smiled and explained, "The stomach is like a cup of tea. If you fill it to the brim, there is no space left for ease, for comfort. Eat until you are satisfied, not stuffed. That moment had stayed with George, though it took years for him to truly understand it. In his younger days, eating was just another necessity, something to be done quickly before moving on to something else. He ate when he was hungry, ate when he was stressed, ate simply because food was in front of him. But as time passed, and as he watched others struggle with illness, with discomfort, with restless nights, he began to see the wisdom in that monk's words. He had known many who ate their evening meals as if they were their last, their plates piled high, their stomachs tight and stretched as they settled into bed, tossing and turning in discomfort. They did not realize that digestion was a quiet, unseen labor, one that worked best when left with space to breathe. Eating lightly in the evening was not about deprivation. It was about kindness, kindness to the body, to the heart, to the night, itself. The body needed rest, not more work. When one ate too much before bed, the stomach did not sleep. It churned and struggled, breaking down what it could, leaving the rest to ferment, to weigh heavy on the gut, to disturb the peace that night was meant to bring. George had long ago made peace with this. His evening meal was always simple, measured not by quantity but by balance. A bowl that was just 70% full left room for everything else. Comfort, rest, and the gentle ease of drifting into sleep without the weight of excess pressing against his ribs. It was a lesson in patience, in control, in understanding that satisfaction does not come from excess but from awareness. He had seen it in many aspects of life, not just food, but in how people consumed everything. More money, more possessions, more distractions, always filling every empty space as if emptiness itself was something to be feared. But what he had come to learn was that space was necessary, in food, in thought, in life. Sitting at his table, he dipped his spoon again, taking in another slow bite. He imagined the many people across the world, eating hurriedly, finishing their plates without thought, filling themselves with more than they needed. He wished he could tell them what he had learned, that the body, much like the soul, needed balance. People spent their lives looking for ways to feel better, searching for remedies, for secrets to longevity, for cures to restlessness. But sometimes, the answers were simple. Eat less at night, and you will sleep better. Sleep better, and you will live longer. Live longer, and you will realize that life was never about having more, but about knowing when you already have enough. And so, as George finished his meal, he set his spoon down, letting the warmth of the food settle within him. He did not need more. He had enough. He was enough. The room was bathed in a soft, golden glow from the bedside lamp. George Thompson sat in his old wooden chair, a book resting on his lap, its worn pages filled with words that had accompanied him through countless nights. The house was quiet, save for the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. Outside, the moon hung low, casting silver light over the world, as if inviting everything to rest. There was a time when nights felt different. He remembered the world before screens, before the constant hum of notifications, before people carried little glowing rectangles in their hands. Always staring, always scrolling. Back then, the night had been a time for slowing down, for sitting with one's thoughts, for allowing the day to settle like dust in the evening air. Now things had changed. He had watched as people became prisoners to their own devices. Their faces illuminated by the cold blue light of their screens long after the sun had set. Even in the quietest hours, their fingers still moved, scrolling endlessly through news, through updates, through distractions that stole away the peace that night was meant to bring. George had never owned a smartphone. He had no need for it. But he had seen how it shaped the lives of others, his grandchildren, his neighbors, the strangers he passed in town. He had seen their tired eyes, the way they moved through the day with a heaviness they couldn't quite name. He had listened as they spoke of restless nights, of waking up exhausted, of feeling disconnected despite being constantly connected. He understood what they did not. The body was not meant for constant stimulation. The mind was not meant to be filled every second of every day. Nighttime was supposed to be a sanctuary, a space for the mind to soften, for the heart to breathe. But how could one truly rest when the last thing they saw before sleep was a screen flashing with the noise of the world? Light had always been powerful. He had learned that long ago. The gentle glow of a candle could soothe the soul, just as the harsh glare of a screen could disrupt it. Scientists now said what the elders had always known. Blue light from screens tricked the brain into believing it was still day, disrupting the body's natural rhythm, delaying the release of melatonin, the very thing that guided one into deep, healing sleep. But the damage went beyond biology. There was something else, something deeper, that bothered him. When people stared into their screens, they were not just delaying sleep, they were delaying themselves. They were postponing the quiet moments where reflection could happen, where the day could be processed, where they could simply be. Instead of listening to the hush of the night, they filled it with noise, with distractions that did not serve them, with endless information that left them more anxious than before. George had spent nearly a century learning the value of stillness. Knew that peace was not found in more stimulation but in less. He knew that the night was a gift, a time to let go, to unwind, to prepare the body and mind for the renewal that sleep would bring. That was why, every evening, he followed the same ritual, turning off the lights, setting aside the world, letting the quiet embrace him like an old friend. If he could give advice to those struggling with restless nights, it would be simple. Put the phone down. Let the world wait. Let yourself remember what night is meant for. Not for scrolling, not for consuming, but for releasing, for resting, for being. And so, as George turned the last page of his book, his eyelids grew heavy, his breath deep and steady. The world outside was quiet, and so was he. The light had dimmed, and in its place, the night held him gently, whispering the promise of another day. The night air carried a quiet stillness, the kind that invited the body to slow down, to release the weight of the day. George Thompson sat on the edge of his bed, rolling up the cuffs of his worn cotton pajamas, his feet aching from a lifetime of movement. Beside him, a small wooden basin sat filled with warm water, steam rising gently into the dimly lit room. He dipped his foot in slowly, then the other, sighing as the warmth wrapped around him like an old familiar embrace. This was his nightly ritual, one he had kept for years, not out of habit, not because someone told him to, but because it simply felt right. A simple act, yet one that carried a wisdom most people overlooked. He had learned the value of warm water long ago, when he was just a boy. His mother, a woman of quiet strength, had believed that the feet carried the burdens of the body, absorbing the exhaustion of the day. "If your feet are tired, your whole body suffers," she would say, kneeling beside him as she gently poured warm water over his small, dirt-streaked toes. "But if you care for them, they will carry you far." George never forgot that lesson. He had walked through nearly a century of life, his feet taking him across countless roads, some easy, some steep, some that led him to love, and others that led him through loss. Through it all, they had remained loyal, steady beneath him, even as time wore them down. And so, every night, he gave them this offering of warmth, a quiet thank you for carrying him through another day. The warmth of the water did more than just soothe his feet. It reached deeper into his bones, his muscles, his very breath. It was as if the tension stored within him, the weight of conversations, the echoes of old worries, the stiffness of age, melted away, dissolving into the water like ink fading from a page. Science now confirmed what the elders had always known. Soaking one's feet before bed wasn't just comforting, it was healing. The feet, with their network of pressure points connected to the rest of the body, responded to warmth like a flower unfolding in the sun. Blood circulation improved, muscles relaxed, Stress softened its grip. It was as if the body recognized. The signal. It's time to rest now. You are safe. You are home. George had seen how people rushed through their evenings, collapsing into bed with their minds still tangled in the day's demands. They overlooked the small transitions, the quiet, rituals that signaled to the body that the time for effort had passed, that it was now time for renewal. A warm foot soak was not just about the feet. It was about slowing down, about honoring the body that had carried him for so long, about treating the night not as an afterthought, but as something sacred. He often thought about Margaret, his late wife, who had once soaked her feet beside him, their quiet conversations floating between the steam and the soft sound of water. He still did it alone now, but not truly alone. The memory remained, warm like the water that cradled his feet. As he closed his eyes, he imagined the many people out there, tossing and turning in their beds, their bodies restless, their minds unwilling to surrender to sleep. He wished he could tell them what he had learned. That healing does not come only from medicine or from great efforts. Sometimes it comes from something as simple as a basin of warm water, a few quiet minutes, and the willingness to listen to what the body has been trying to say all along. Tonight, as George let the warmth seep into him, he felt once again the same quiet truth he had felt for years, that the smallest acts of care are often the most powerful, that rest is not just given, but invited, and that sometimes healing begins right where the body meets the earth, in the simple embrace of water and warmth. The house was quiet, wrapped in the soft glow of a single bedside lamp. George Thompson sat at his small wooden table, hands gently cradling a ceramic cup filled with warm water. He lifted it slowly, letting the steam rise to meet his face, inhaling its subtle comfort before taking a slow, deliberate sip. The warmth traveled down his throat, settling in his chest, spreading like a gentle reminder that his body, even after all these years, still deserved care. This was a ritual he had followed. For decades, one so simple that most people overlooked its power. A cup of warm water before bed, nothing more, nothing less. No elaborate mixtures, no secret ingredients, just the quiet act of nourishment, of giving his body something it had always needed. George had learned the value of this habit in the most unexpected way. It was many years ago, in a small mountain village in China, where he had met an elderly man who, despite his age, carried himself with the energy of someone much younger. The man had invited George into his modest home, offering him a seat and a cup of warm water. There had been no tea leaves, no added flavors, just plain water, heated to a soothing warmth. At first, George had found it strange. He had grown up in a world that celebrated coffee, sugary drinks, and cold refreshments. Drinking warm water felt unnecessary, even dull. But as he sat there, watching the old man sip with deep satisfaction, he had asked why. The man had smiled, setting his cup down with the reverence one might give a treasured possession. Warm water is kindness, he had said simply. To the body, to the heart, to life itself. It soothes what is tired, cleanses what is heavy, and prepares the body for rest. It is a small gift, given every night, to the self. That moment had stayed with George long after he had left that village. Over the years, as he watched friends struggle with restless nights, with aching joints, with discomfort they couldn't quite name, he had remembered the old man's words. And so, he had begun to drink warm water before bed. At first it had felt like nothing more than a habit, a quiet gesture at the end of the day. But over time, he began to notice the difference. His digestion felt lighter, his sleep deeper, his body more at ease. The warmth seemed to melt away the stiffness that came with age, allowing his muscles to relax, his breath to slow. It was as if his body recognized the signal. It's time to let go now. It's time to rest. Science now confirmed what the elders had always known. Warm water before bed helped digestion, aided circulation, flushed out toxins, and kept the body hydrated through the night. It supported the heart, the kidneys, the liver, silent workers that labored even as the rest of him slept. But beyond the physical benefits, there was something deeper, something quieter that made this ritual sacred. It was a pause, a moment, of stillness in a world that moved too fast, a reminder that care did not have to be complicated, that sometimes the most profound acts of self-love were the simplest ones. George had seen how people treated their bodies, rushing through meals, depriving themselves of rest, ignoring the quiet signals their bodies sent. They waited for illness before they remembered to care, but he had learned differently. You do not wait until the roof is leaking to care for the house. You do not wait until the body aches to show it kindness. And so, every night, as the world outside grew silent, George sat with his cup of warm water, feeling its gentle heat seep into his bones, into his heart. It was a ritual not just of health, but of gratitude. A way to say, thank you, body, for carrying me through another day. Thank you, heart, for beating without complaint. Thank you, breath, for continuing, even when I forget to notice. As he took his final sip, he smiled to himself, feeling the warmth settle deep within him. He had no great wealth, no lavish comforts, but he had this, a small moment of peace, a quiet understanding of what it meant to care for oneself. And in that, he had everything. The house had long since fallen into silence, the world outside settling into its quiet rhythm. George Thompson lay in bed, his breath slow and steady, his body relaxed in the way only a well-lived day could allow. The familiar warmth of his nightly rituals lingered. A gentle walk that had eased the weight of time from his bones, a simple meal that had nourished without burden, the absence of harsh light letting his mind soften into rest, the warmth of water cradling his feet, and, finally, the quiet comfort of a cup of warm water, a final act of care before surrendering to sleep. These were not grand gestures. They were not secrets hidden in books or expensive routines found in wellness magazines. They were simple, steady habits, woven into the fabric of his life like an old, beloved quilt. And yet, they had given him everything: health, clarity, peace. People often looked for miracles in the extraordinary, but George had learned that true well-being was found in the ordinary, in the small acts done with intention. Longevity was not about fighting against time. It was about moving with it, learning to live in harmony with the body instead of demanding more from it than it was willing to give. It was about honoring the natural rhythms of life, knowing when to move and when to rest, when to nourish and when to let go. He had seen the world change in his 98 years. He had watched as people became busier, as they filled every hour with tasks, with noise, with distraction. He had seen how they neglected their bodies, ignored their exhaustion, treated rest as something to be earned rather than something that was necessary. But the truth was, the body did not wait for permission to grow tired. The mind did not wait for a better time to need peace. Perhaps that was the greatest lesson he could share. Care for yourself now. Not when you have more time, not when the stress has passed, not when the world tells you it is finally acceptable to rest. Now, in the small ways, in the quiet ways, in the way you walk, in the way you eat, in the way you close the day with care instead of exhaustion. His habits had never been about living longer. That had simply been a gift, a natural consequence of treating his body with the respect it deserved. What they had truly given him was presence, a deeper, fuller way of existing in the world, of feeling each moment, of knowing that his life, no matter how many years it stretched, had been lived well. As sleep gently took hold of him, George felt no regrets, no unfinished tasks gnawing at his mind. He had done what he could. He had lived with care. and now he could rest. If you take anything from his story, let it be this: slow down. Take a walk. Eat mindfully. Let go of the distractions that do not serve you. Give yourself permission to rest, to heal, to exist in a way that feels full and real. The small choices you make today will shape the life you wake up to tomorrow. And if this story has spoken to you, if it has reminded you of something you have long forgotten, then take a moment to breathe, to be still. And if you'd like to continue this journey of learning how to live well, I invite you to like this video, share it with those who may need it, and subscribe to our channel. Because in the end, the best thing we can give ourselves is the knowledge that we lived with intention, with kindness, with peace,